Hello, everyone. I am Lucy. I'm the curator here at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. And as always, I'd like to open this event by acknowledging and honoring the fact that we are standing here with our feet rooted on Treaty 2 territory, which is the traditional lands of the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, Dakota, and Anishinaabes people. It is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are very happy to invite our guests who primarily gather on Treaty 1, and who I'm sure make the same acknowledgement with the same sense of honor and responsibility. I am going to keep this briefer than I usually do because I want to make sure to uplift the voices that we're all here today to hear. So I will leave everything there and pass it on to our wonderful moderator, Diane Dreiger.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our panel. It's called CrippingTheArts, Cryptic Artists Speak on Technology, Art, and Accessibility. It is a companion panel to the current cryptic exhibit here at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. I am the chair of the Arts Accessibility Network of Manitoba. We have our office in Winnipeg. I think all of our artists are from Winnipeg who are going to speak today. Our group is a group of disabled artists and our allies who are promoting training and showing of the work of people with disabilities. We are promoting a professionalism. We're promoting access to arts in the community and serving as a resource to the arts community on that as well. In terms of my background, I'm a visual artist and a poet, and I also teach disability studies at the University of Manitoba. So I am happy to be here and happy to introduce our first speaker. We will have two speakers, and then we're going to have a 15-minute break, and then another two speakers, and we will have all the questions and at the end after everyone has spoken. So let's take off. I would like to introduce Susan Lambert. And Susan Lambert is a multidisciplinary artist interested in challenging the preconceived notions of what an artist with a disability can create. Lambert uses the body as the main theme of her work. Diverse media communicate ideas of access in the arts, reject the view of disability that conventional artists have maintained, and aid in discovering radical new ways in which to express these beliefs. Susan.
Thank you. I am the past chairperson of AANM. I am also a disabled artist, and I started painting when I was in my teens. I was interested in many forms of art during my career. I have been. It wasn't until I was diagnosed with MS in my 20s that I started to investigate disabled art. In fact, I had no idea that I was creating disabled art at all, not knowing that it was a separate area of art. My work is greatly influenced by the body and offers the audience glimpses of neuropathy, memory loss, spasms, and depression. While oil painting has been the vehicle that I've used since I was 15, I'm currently intrigued by the subtle beauty of pastels and collage. Sculpture and printmaking have also been something I've been experimenting with, using various surfaces on which to work, such as velour paper, linen, and wool. The results that have been achieved from this experimentation are a mirror of the themes of disability and age-related disabilities that are tackled in my work. Had I not been forced to deal with the tremors and the weakness in my hand, I would have continued to work with oils, focusing on realistic and intricate details. Instead, I'm working with abstract, ideal, and radical new ways of expressing my beliefs. Using different media in each singular piece allows me to explore the disparities and similarities between bodies of persons with disabilities and those who are able-bodied. Plaster, glass, wood, and yarn are substitutes for parts of the body, suggesting disorder, confusion, painful, non-symmetrical intersections. Researching the disease, analyzing my symptoms, and examining MRI tests and outcomes have allowed me to better understand my body and how to portray it in my art creatively. Having lived through 40 years of mostly an invisible disability gives me insight into the inner workings of the medical system and what nonsense patients have to put up with. Thankfully, my neurologist fully understands this and fights for the rights of his patients. The exhibition we have in this gallery is a culmination of work of which I was in a mentorship at the Video Pool Media Arts Center with these talented artists. The first phase of the project was funded by a grant awarded by the Canada Council for the Arts back in 2019. The plaster masks, the MRI prints, and the glass brain were all pieces that I had completed using that grant. And incorporating multimedia into my art was something that I've always wanted to do, and the mentorship empowered me to add projection mapping and video to the project, which I had been doing with the grant. The grant that I was working on was called Disruption/Interruption. I had obtained 1,200 of my MRI scans from 2009 to 2018 from the Health Science Center in Winnipeg. And for the video, I used a program called Osirix, which neurologists use to study MRIs. And I produced a 3D rendering of an MRI scan. And with that 3D rendering, I used the brain to flow in different forms and have the brain had the brain flow words out of it, and the words were symptoms caused by MS, some of which I have experienced in the past and some that I am experiencing now. The projection mapping piece is meant to portray the disorientation and frustration I feel navigating through my life while dealing with the disease that causes memory loss, speech impairment, confusion, and other cognitive symptoms. Seeing little people walking and wheeling through a maze of brain vessels trying to find their way out and not doing a very good job of it brings a comical and lightheaded vein to the exhibit. I also used digital MRI scans to print 40 digital prints on clear acetate sheets. I then have sewn MS plaques with yarn onto these MRI scans to show where the disease had damaged the brain. Neurologists use these MRI scans to monitor disease activity and progression through MS. I have left trailing pieces of fiber falling from the plaques to denote the axons of the nerves that also receive damage from MS. The 46 plaster masks on the wall represent me trying to say something. Each plaster cast has a speaking bubble, but none of the bubbles have any words in them because no one is listening. All through my years of dealing with the medical community, I have felt impotent and exposed by a system that treats disabled people as if they are a disease rather than a person. Artists, unfortunately, that doesn't make sense. When I was a computer analyst, doctors were relatively helpful. When I was a computer analyst, doctors were relatively helpful in trying to help me keep employed and useful. But when I switched careers, went back to university and took fine arts, I found many doctors treated me as if I was a peripheral human, not needed in society, as if you have just one more person, you just weren't all that important. It's weird. And if you have one more chronic disease besides, say, MS, you almost have a split personality. It's very strange. And if you're just not taken seriously, it's very, very weird. If you have the flu on top of that, forget it. The glass brain, well, originally I wanted to pump words through the glass brain, but it was almost impossible to figure out how to pump anything besides water or liquid through a glass brain. So I had to be happy with liquid through the glass brain. And so I eventually just decided to do the water and oil through the glass brain. And I decided that it was going to be like a clot kind of thing for the glass brain. Frustrated, angry, amused, fearful, triumphant, defiant. After researching how to pump, that's how I felt with my glass brain. Showing disability art can be difficult because there are so many attitudinal barriers. Although galleries are becoming more sensitive to the disparities people with disabilities encounter, artists with disabilities still find venues are catering to the audience rather than the artists themselves. For instance, a few years ago, a venue in Winnipeg had a massive renovation done, and of course, all of the appropriate accessibilities were added. The only thing they forgot to do was make the stage accessible. Artists will find parking, entrances, and bathrooms are updated, but not the backstage or the way the exhibits are presented. There are many ASL, which is American Sign Language, available for audiences to see a performance, but there's no ASL available for a deaf person to learn how to dance or to be a photographer. Another major gallery in Winnipeg was flabbergasted to learn how easy it is to use audio description on iPads for people with visual impairment just to guide them through an exhibit. It's such an easy little change and so important for somebody with visual impairment. These small, easily attainable fixes can make such a difference in someone's experience in a museum, gallery, or theater. Showing disability art can be difficult, also because audiences may feel uncomfortable watching or seeing disability art. And that's why we feel it's so important to encourage discussions and conversations we have with our audiences. Talking about our illnesses, whether it's mental illness, invisible illness, chronic illness, age-related illness, is something our society has taught us not to do at an early age. We avoid the negative and we gloss over the hard parts, but artists like to delve into those hard to talk about conversations and get into the dirty parts. We like to put the mirror up to our face and show all those wrinkles and those age spots. That's what we're particularly good at, being controversial. Artists give so much of themselves when we're showing our work, and we hope the audience will accept the information and try to process it in an open way. It may not feel or look like art, but in the 1800s, Van Gogh, who is also Van Gogh, if anybody doesn't know, was ridiculed for his painting. People said it looked comic and the brushstrokes were so sloppy and crude. But many artists have been rejected and later celebrated. Our art can be looked at as different. It is so personal. Each piece a bit torn from our bodies and minds, made from such a personal space. We're divulging such intimate details of our lives, giving the audience insight into the mayhem and disruption of what we call our body and our brain, and what is actually just a slab of meat the medical system experiments on. In the end, it is the unique, distinct perspective that gives us that new voice in the arts world that others don't have. That voice says we're proud of where we came from, who we are, and ultimately what our disability has manifested for us.
Thanks so much, Susan. Couple things I just wanted to pick up on. You are so right that we as people with disabilities have a lot to share. And I don't know if folks know, but according to the 2017 census, 22% of Canadians now identify as having a physical, mental, invisible, visible, chronic illness, sensory disability. And so that's not a small minority anymore. We are a large minority. We have a lot to say. And as our population is aging, we know the boomer generation is turning 65, 75 very quickly. We will have more people with disabilities join us in our coalitions, our cross-disability coalitions. And our group, Arts Accessibility Network Manitoba, is such a group. We represent and include people with all kinds of disabilities. And thus, one of the ideas is you don't separate disability groups, and that's why we all together have the same experience of stigma, of not being listened to in medical contexts, of people dismissing us, of people thinking, the stage doesn't need to be accessible in the back or the front, because disabled people never do that. Mm-hmm. Disabled people never go to anything. Right. They stay at home. They don't do anything. So thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Andrea Von Vihart, and she is a Winnipeg visual artist, writer, performer, a self-identified clown who explores abjection as identity. Her work often muses on the failure to meet culturally defined expectations on a consistent and chronic basis. Known as a fearless performer and provocative writer and orator, she has performed spoken word internationally and collaborated with orchestral musicians and composers, witch doctors, and various other eccentric weirdos. She has produced independent performance and art department heavy short films and live theater. Her creative nonfiction has been published in Prairie Fire magazine and in a number of anthologies designed to rile the patriarchy. She has spent some time studying towards a Master of Arts at the Department of English, Film and Theatre at the University of Manitoba. And this summer, she received a Bankability Award from Cahoots Theatre, recognizing excellence in Canadian artists with disabilities. Andrea, take it away.
Thanks, Diane. I think the first thing I'm going to do is kind of knock down some of the things that have already been said, is that I believe, yes, as a political body, people with disabilities need to unite as an organized whole to affect political change. But within the disability community, I want to emphasize that there is no monolith, and that especially for white women who could all afford their own computers and were able to apply for a very rarefied arts program by themselves, are not representative. of the bigger disability community. And that access to services and access to programs is further complicated by racial inequity, white supremacy, sexism, and classism, because it's very easy to lose sight of that, especially because we're a very homogenous group. And so I'll start with that. And I can only speak for myself, and to position myself is I have an invisible disability. I have a psychiatric disability, which the medical establishment would like to call a mental illness and would like me to believe is a mental illness, but given what I now know about the physiology and the workings of my brain, it doesn't make sense. In terms of being an artist, I have always been an artist. Professionally, aside from making my own art in my own art practice, I have been working in the theater and film and entertainment industries for 3 decades. And primarily now I work as a scenic artist, which means I paint sets and backdrops, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not all I do. I also work as a writer and performer. And luckily, I get to diversify my income streams, which is something you have to do anyway in the arts. I was on official disability. I was receiving CPP disability for about almost 5 years, from 2015 to late 2019. And at that point in time, I would definitely not identify myself as a person with a disability in the community which I am working with. And with that, I mean the theater community. Because in the industries where the majority of the employees are contract workers, like in film and theater, the majority of people who've worked on the production aren't in the program. They never make the credits. Those are just a select group of people who were there enough, and it's decided by a rubric of importance. But working in the entertainment industry, I was a contract worker, a contract employee, and the attitude when you're sick is, oh, I'm really sorry you can't do that. Could you have the name of someone else who can do it instead of you? And then the next time there's a call for a job, the person that you recommended gets the job, because you're only remembered by your last mistake. And while there are efforts to change that, it comes from a greater sense. There's an old adage, the show must go on. And people within the disability arts sector who are focusing on theater and live performance are saying, really? Is the show really that important? And that actually really threatens our current state of the arts, especially professional arts in Canada, because we're forced to prove professionalism, and that it's the art making that's the most important and not the people. And there are a lot of political considerations behind that. At the same time, while I was not acknowledging my disability to my professional peers because I didn't want to be ostracized should I return to work, for the first time, and it was through Arts Accessibility Network Manitoba, I saw opportunities where, as an artist in my own arts practice, I could access institutions and programs and training. Now, as an artist myself and a disabled artist, what I do, if people want to call it disability art because I'm someone who's disabled, that's fine. But in my own art practice, I contend that both my visual artwork and my performance work is world class. I do not need any help being an artist. I was born that way. I have a particular discipline, and I have trained, and I have put thousands of hours into my practice over my lifetime. I'm completely assured of my professionalism, and things like Instagram, where you can instantly take a survey of what's happening in the visual arts across the globe. I am confident that my work stands with anyone else's. For me, as a person with a disability, it is the idea of accessing the rarefied world of arts culture and the glad handing and sometimes the ass kissing that you have to do to get forward in the industry and play the game. I'm not good at that. And also, because of the nature of, as the press like to look at what's wrong with me, is that a lot of times I don't have the mental time or energy or space to promote myself. I'm just trying to get through my day. And it doesn't make for like a real consistency in selling yourself in a positive way, which, because we live in a capitalist society, the arts ultimately are an industry, and either the things you create or you yourself are a product. I am a terrible capitalist. I am a terrible marketer of myself. And the struggles that I have internally, and with the fact that persons like myself are statistically and culturally more susceptible to experience more trauma over the course of the lifetime, I have enough on my plate trying to just regulate my emotional dysregulation. I have cognitive issues, but not intellectual ones, which is what people find very confusing about my disability, and beside the fact that it's invisible. I get a lot of, you can't have cognitive problems because you're so bright. And the fact is that cognition is not just an intellectual faculty of our brains. We cognate when we process emotions, we cognate on a lower sensory level, and different parts of our brain can be neuroatypical. It's just that when you say cognitively disabled, everyone thinks of someone who has intellectual deficits. And that is not actually the case. So for me, entering the world of disability arts gave me access to these institutions and people who came with the sponsoring institution who helped to bridge the social gap for me, and institutions who they would take care of the publicity. They would take care of that sort of stuff, and they could let me do the thing that I'm really good at, which is making art. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, do I have time, Diane?
Oh, yes.
Okay. The other thing that we're talking about here is technology. And when we say technology today, we often mean new media technology or digital computer technology that was made available to the public in the early 2000s and has revolutionized the way we communicate, the way we see one another, the way we gather for arts and culture events. And to me, that is a very, very narrow time space. I am a bit of a Luddite myself because of the nature of my cognitive dysregulation. I push back by needing to be very embodied. My work is very embodied. It's about making things or providing experiential moments for other people that cannot be captured over time. They're one-off. The performances are one-off, ephemeral things that exist only in the moment. And then I also make visual artwork. I have not yet given up my complete and utter fascination with the technology of pencils and paper and words. And when we think, I think the first printing press is like, I think it's either 1485 or it's 1510. I can't remember. It's one of those two. So the first printing press is created, and it is a revolutionary thing because now the Bible can be mass produced in a language that the actual human beings who live in the town speak, and they can understand the word of God, as opposed to a priest reading something Latin to you that you didn't understand. So the technology of words themselves and being able to put a word on a piece of paper and fold it up, and like a magic spell, you take an idea with you and you can show it to someone else without even speaking or remembering what you said, is first and foremost the technology that blows my mind. And the rest of it, In my most cynical, I think that the coming climate crisis will show that our dependence on new digital technologies and communication is foolhardy. Now, though, I'm torn. Because while I am personally not interested in making things that beep or sitting in front of a computer and doing things like whatever people do on computers when they make art, I do see that it has its place in artwork and in my own art as a way of influencing the audience's emotions, and often by making them feel like they are uncannily displaced. And I also have mixed feelings about the arts and technology because a dear friend of mine who's also an artistic collaborator, she is disabled in a way that she can't actually leave her house. It's very dangerous for her to be out in the world with other people who might be wearing perfume, and she has a life-threatening latex allergy, and you would be surprised at how many daily objects have latex in them. And for the first time ever this year, we were able to write, rehearse, perform a bunch of situation comedy that we've been just doing for our own amusement for almost 20 years. We were able to do that because for the first time, a theater company was taking pre-recorded streaming pieces. And if I want to work with this particular collaborator, I have no choice, but we need to rely on the technology. And the fact that for people like my friend, that the pandemic has opened new vistas and possibilities for them, I think is very important in terms of truly democratizing both ideas and our society. But I am also disturbed by how easily institutions, and I do understand that the pandemic makes this more complicated, but I look at the fact that we are basically like monkeys who learned how to shave. If we're looking at it from like a really long evolutionary perspective, I don't know if people believe in evolution. I do. But if you want to believe in evolution, we have not only millions of years of evolution, if you look at like just terrestrial vertebrates on the planet, but now you look at like primates, because we're like, what is it, 2% different DNA from a chimp. So we're primates, we are group creatures, we need to be social. We have social pecking orders, and we need to have physical contact with one another on a regular basis in order to maintain our health. And there's something about the embodied nature of people coming to a place, and in a long time in our prehistory, they would have gone to a sacred place. And maybe not everyone would be invited to every sacred place, but there would be one sacred place where everybody who was accepted within that smaller community, not like an industrial city, but the people that you knew and that you were codependent with for your survival, you would gather in places that were special to enact special rituals or thanks with the group of people that you depended on as a social bonding moment. And I think that that is why even today we like to try to forget that that's where we come from. And especially most of us who live in urban centers, our technological evolution has outstripped our emotional and our mental evolution, and it causes a lot of stress. But as these primate beings, I really think that the value of embodied togetherness that helps us to make meaning of the randomness of the world is something that we need, not only in order to be personally healthy, but in order to become vitally invested in the welfare of the other, which again, if you believe in science and the coming climate crisis is real, We can't solve these problems as individuals looking after our own individual needs and desires. We actually have to make real emotional connections with each other and with people we don't like and people we don't agree with. And then somehow, after making those incredibly difficult emotional connections, we have to be rational enough and pause for a moment so that we're making decisions based on our common good and not upon what is ego gratification or our own particular fears might be. And I think I'll pause if there's any questions or additions.
I was just going to reiterate, Andrea, that people working together has always gotten the job done. And you know, the reason why people with disabilities have protected rights in Canada under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Human Rights Codes and the new Accessibility Canada Act is because people with disabilities saw their common cause from many different backgrounds, many different disabilities. As you say, you ignore the things that separate you and you coalesce around the things that bring you together in a common purpose, right? And I totally agree with that.
This just makes me think of one thing that Hugh Conacher, who is the production person I hired for my performance, and we came out together, that we were talking about disability arts, and it has to do with accessibility and access needs. And the first thing is that access needs are completely different and sometimes in opposition to each other. For a really easy example, Yvette's access needs and my access needs are not only different, they're kind of completely opposite to one another. And the next thing is that Hugh comes from not a disability art background, but he wants to be a contributor as an ally with a lot of information and skills. And he said, it would be helpful for me if I knew what everyone's access needs were before I showed up, because in the moment of doing something, like you can misinterpret people's behavior or confusion. And then that led me to think about, okay, well, how do we do this officially and structurally and institutionally? And then I went, well, it seems to be simple. If we could, and I want to emphasize that the reason this hasn't happened is that we are the ones who are actually creating it right now. But as a possible model, we could say, if an institution invites you to show in their gallery specifically because you're an artist with a disability, then courtesy would say that maybe, let's say, the institution then asks, what are your access needs, how we can provide. However, if you as an artist approach a gallery as an individual, or the offer from the gallery has nothing to do with disability art specifically, then it's incumbent upon you as an artist with a disability to talk to the appropriate person and say, hey, I just want to let you know, this is my deal. These are my access needs. And for those situations, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that there's money available so that you can come to an institution with your access needs and say, look, I got this grant and it's going to help me get ABC. Is that true, or am I making something up?
It depends on whether the institution has worked in access needs into the budget of the overall project.
Well, there is money from Canada Council for the Arts.
That's what I'm
available,
yeah.
and they will give you.
Yeah. Okay.
But you have to apply for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, but you know what? If you want, everyone has to apply for grants.
But I'm thinking, like in Manitoba, there isn't, and. No. What we've been thinking in AANM, Janelle and I, the executive director, have talked about this. We need to encourage every arts institution to include accommodations in their budget, full stop.
Yep.
Whether you think you're having someone who's disabled or not.
Yep.
We don't know who's disabled anymore. We have many people with invisible disabilities. Yes. And we need to assume that people with disabilities are here, that we're coming, that we're creating, that we're attending shows. And so I think this needs to be a line item for all arts groups, like for the year, like what's your overall budget? And what are you going to budget for accommodation needs? And the other thing too, I just wanted to mention is that AANM is going to be doing an accessibility audit of all the arts institutions in Winnipeg. And we have made a survey tool, and we have an individual with a disability who is going to visit and look at a lot of the aspects, not only the physical aspect, but attitudinal issues. Are people welcome there? Are there funds for ASL? Is your place, do you have an accessible washroom? Or you think you do, but you don't actually, once a person who's a wheelchair user tries to use it. And those are the kinds of things we're going to do. And we want to have this database then on our website. And of course, we're not pretending it's exhaustive at all. We held public meetings, town hall meetings of people with disabilities to find out what needs are out there. And we have compiled that into our tool. And of course, we will constantly be adding. But it's totally easier to do it together as people with disabilities than to have to always feel the onus on yourself. And I know it too well myself. You always feel like there's something wrong with me and I am now going to point it out, right?
I'm hoping that, again, idealistically, I'm hoping at some point it will be okay to know that, say there's something wrong with me and point it out yourself. And I do believe that, yes, politically there is power in a group, but because we live in an individualistic society and we still have capitalism and we still have all the systems that we have, is that it is very important for us as artists and human beings to be responsible for our own access needs, to be responsible for our own triggers, to be responsible for our own selves, because we live in a culture that says no one else is going to take care of you. And we need to make sure that we take the steps to empower ourselves, especially because there's a consistent narrative that not just people with disabilities, but that women